Turns out this employee forgot to submit expense reports for about 4 or 5 months. This person submitted like $40,000 worth of expense reports that were not budgeted for. We actually blew our budget for that department because we didn't have visibility into that spend.
Oops. But for real, oops doesn't begin to capture the size of the problem that bad expense management can inflict, which is why it's crucial for CFOs and finance leaders to, 1, have a strategy for managing expenses, and 2, have the right software in place to make it happen in your organization. Now, I'm not an expert on expense management, but Dave is.
I've been a finance professional my entire career, leading finance teams at early stage startups. With early stage startups, you usually do not get a lot of budget on the finance and accounting team. And so I've used technology to make myself and my team more efficient, more effective at doing our job.
That's Dave Wieseneck. He's an expert in residence at Ramp, and I tapped him to learn more about expense management. What are the costs of doing it wrong? And how does modern expense management software support the strategic framework that he has that he calls context and control?
There's a famous quote or misquote from Peter Drucker: if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And so the idea of context and control is like being able to measure your spend, understand it, and then you can put controls and really dictate how the company spends their money.
Now that reminded me of an anecdote that came up in a previous conversation with Matthew Schultz, also at Ramp.
And I'm thinking, oh, okay, this is a fintech company, but why are we buying used clothes? And the further we dug in, it was about 90 days later, we'd found out that somebody probably bought themselves a new wardrobe to the tune of about $15,000.
And that's how we got to talking about the $40,000 expense report, along with other horror stories that illustrate the pitfalls of bad expense management.
It took them until the end of the month when they got maybe a CSV export from the credit card provider. They got that report and they could see that. That was at the end of the month. When I was running finance at a previous company, I have this story. We didn't have robust corporate cards. We didn't give out P cards to employees, and we asked them to just do reimbursements, okay? Which means that an employee has to essentially loan the company money for a month, 2 months until they submit their expense report, it gets approved, finance and accounting put it through payroll so they can get repaid. We had employees that were waiting 2 months to get repaid for a trip that we asked them to do. Obviously, that is not a great experience. And we had one employee who would travel every week. It was a salesperson. They traveled every week. And think $4,000, $5,000 on flights and hotels and per diems. And the expectation was that they would submit an expense report and we would pay them back. Turns out this employee forgot to submit expense reports for about 4 or 5 months. And we in accounting had not accounted for that spend. So at the end of the year, this person submitted like $40,000 worth of expense reports that were not budgeted for. We actually blew our budget for that department because we didn't have visibility into that spend. With modern finance spend management tools, you get that visibility and you can account for it as the spend is happening. You do not need to wait until someone submits an expense report. You just don't have that visibility. But it's crazy. We as a company have asked you to go spend money, and now we're asking you to personally loan those funds to us as a company. That's just not really appropriate. If we are asking you to do something on behalf of the company, you should be accessing company funds in a safe and controlled manner, of course, but accessing company funds. One of the things that I really don't like about expense reports and having to wait until like the end of the month or the end of the quarter is that you have so much work to do, right? If you have one expense, it's easy. But if you go on a trip, you have your flight, your hotel, all of the per diems, your breakfast, your lunch, your dinner, the Wi-Fi, all of these different things. It adds up. Now you have 20, 30, 40 expenses to do and create this report. That may take an hour of your time, and nobody has just like an hour to do their expense report.
Now, all of that is the result of bad expense management. So what does good expense management look like? Well, this is where Dave's framework of context and control comes in.
Let's break that down. Number one, context is full visibility in how you're spending your money, right? Without that context, you can't really decide then what type of controls you need to have in the future. So the first thing is to understand how you're spending money broadly across the company, who's spending it, on what, and how. Once you have that context, you can then be strategic about what you need to do, right? So do I need to put controls in place, approvals? Do we need to be strategic about how we pay certain vendors in different scenarios? And that is kind of the idea of like context is understanding and then control. If you break it down by category, right? So a lot of companies buy professional services versus, let's say, software. And there's multiple ways you could buy, let's say, software. You could put it on a P card, a corporate card, a ramp card. Someone could buy it personally with their personal funds, their personal credit card, and reimburse for it. Or you could go out there and sign an agreement with that software and pay on a monthly basis through or an annual basis with an invoice. And so understanding how you're paying for certain pieces of software helps you assess the risk that you as a company have. Paying for something on without a contract for a really important piece of software may be too much risk for your company to take on. You might want to have a contract in place, legal review it, and then of course pay them through, let's say, an ACH, or maybe even pay with a card. But without that visibility, right? Without the understanding, the context of how you're paying for software broadly or specifically with a specific vendor, you can't really decide then how to put in controls and really to tell the company, this is how we buy software. So the first thing you need to do is understand it, get a full visibility, a map of where you're spending your money, the context. That way you can implement proper controls. One of the stories that Matt was talking about is that timing, right? And so when you think about modern spend management platforms, you get real-time access, real-time visibility into the spend. When you swipe a ramp card, for example, the administrator, the manager of that spender is going to see that spend immediately. And they're going to get all of the context. They're going to get the receipt, the memo, all of the information that the credit card processor will give you, right? Because we have an API access with that credit card processor. We get all that information. You get that access immediately. You don't have to wait until the month end. So if someone is spending on the second day of the month, the accounting team and the managers might not see that spend until the 31st at the end of the month when they get the report.
Mhm.
Within Ramp, you get that context, that information in real time immediately. So that's a huge kind of win for modern spend management platforms.
So context means visibility. It means having one source of truth where every transaction can be captured instantly and contextualized by departments and needs. And once you have that context, you can start adding controls that enable your team to operate fast without a bunch of red tape.
We've been talking about, I think, more so the context side, and then there's also the control side, which might even be behind. You'd mentioned, you worked at a company that didn't distribute P cards to its employees. Part of it might be apprehension. Maybe you have a big company and it's like, I can't really watch everybody who's spending this. So what does the control side of that look like?
Of course, there's reporting and visibility type of control. You can see how people are spending in real time. You can put a stop to it if it's inappropriate. But there's other types of controls, things, approvals, manager or CEO approval. If it's a certain level, then the approval needs to go to a certain person. But you can also put kind of upfront controls on the expenses, on the specific, ramp card or really corporate card, P card that you give out to your employees. So think category restrictions or merchant controls, right? This card can only be used on this merchant. These funds that you have issued out can only be used with this specific software vendor, right? That way, if the card number gets stolen, you will not be able to use it at anything else except for like this specific category, that specific merchant. You can have other types of controls like cards locking. If you go on a business trip, and your business trip is from today until next week, well, we can lock your card, lock your funds right after your trip is done. That way, you've used your funds for the specific purpose, but there is a control in place so that you don't use those funds for other things. Kind of traditional P cards is that you get access to a card, there is a limit on it, but you have unfettered access to spend on that card. With modern tools, you have controls that are put in place by software and controlled by the administrator on those cards and what they can spend versus not.
So this strategic framework of context and control and implementing it with modern spend management platforms like Ramp, it's not just about making the lives of CFOs easier. It's about enabling everyone in the company to operate at the speed of business and do it while avoiding bad spend.
In that article, they talk a lot about how U.S. government can learn from the private sector in terms of spend control. And one of the things that they talked about was how I think the statistic that was cited was that in 2024, Ramp had prevented nearly $2 billion in bad transactions. And it broke it down by different categories. And I was kind of surprised that like fraud was actually a pretty small sliver of that category. So kind of to the point that you're talking right now, it's like fraud is very important to stop that stuff, but it's kind of like the tip of the iceberg when it comes to bad transactions.
I totally agree. I mean, I think most employees, including government employees too, but most employees are not fraudulent. Most employees actually want to do the right thing. They're just lazy in a good way. It's not their job to be spenders of money. It's not their job to fill out expense reports. Their job is sales. Their job is marketing. Their job is developers. Their job is accountants, right? They're going to try and spend money the fastest way that they can. They're trying to move at the speed of business. And so most spend is not fraud because they want to do the right thing by the company. They just want to make sure that A, they know what the right thing to do is. B, they can get from point A to point B as fast as possible. And so what we see with a lot of bad transactions are just mistakes because they are not set up for success. A lot of those bad transactions are recurring transactions that they forgot about. The software is still going and the vendor keeps, charging them month after month. They haven't canceled. It is the duplicate subscriptions where one person in the team is also spending as another person, right? Duplicative transactions and unnecessary purchases that maybe were not approved by their manager or department leader. And so all of those are kind of like bad transactions that a company like Ramp or modern spend management platforms can really put a stop to that are not necessarily fraud.
As always, thanks to Dave for the thought-provoking conversation and the insights on expense management. If you learned as much as I did, well, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Ramp for more expert tips on how your business can save time and save money. See you next time.